is responsible for ensuring that tax revenue is not abused and misused? Is SARS often used as a vehicle to settle political scores? Are taxpayers aware of their legal rights in their dealings with SARS? Is the tax ombud successful in ensuring a transparent and fair relationship between SARS and taxpayers? What time is it? It's question time. Hello and welcome to Question Time. I'm your host, Mpho Tsedu. The South African Revenue Services Act of 1997 brought about the establishment of SARS as an institution responsible for efficient and effective collection of revenue. The Tax Administration Act number 28 of 2011 saw to the creation of the Tax Ombud as an organ entitled to review and address any complaint by a taxpayer relating to the provision of a tax act by SARS. Both of these institutions report to the country's Minister of Finance. But how professional and effective are these two organs in the execution of their mandate? My guest today is Adrian Lake. Adrian is the spokesperson of SARS, the national spokesperson that is, and Advocate Eric Mkawane is the Chief Executive Officer at the Office of the Tax Ombud. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now, Mr. Lake, why do you collect tax and then let the money get abused by some politicians?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Tsedu, to be in the hot seat. We have a statutory mandate. You have cited two laws that gives effect or effectively gives us our power, our authority, and our legal mandate to collect all revenues for the fiscus, and of course through the National Treasury, which also reports to the Minister of Finance. The public money we collect in the form of taxes are then dispersed for various programs that government commits to over a medium-term period. So that theoretically is the equation and the legal framework in which we operate. But I think if we should talk about any functional democracy like ours, there is a social contract between citizens and the state. That says we have a constitution that affords certain rights to individuals, companies or economically active entities. And they operate in our economy and within our democracy. And part of the obligations they have is then to pay taxes to the fiscus, the rates of which are then determined by the Minister of Finance and Treasury and also Parliament.
So you're saying to me, we only collect the money, give it to government, they'll see what to do with it?
Well, I think coming to your very first question in the introduction, who's responsible to see that money is not abused? I think all South Africans, all citizens, all people in this democracy who's economically active, who contribute to the fiscus. We all have a duty. When we encounter corruption, when we encounter solicitations for bribery, when we encounter improper conduct, particularly by public servants or public officials, we should report it. You should bring it to our attention. And as an institution, we like to believe we have a record that we can demonstrate. We act against corruption. We act where there's abuse of the fiscus because we have to preserve the integrity of our institution. Why would people part with their hard-earned money if we cannot demonstrate? If people don't pay tax, we must deal with them. If people abuse the law, we must deal with them. If people abuse the public finance system, to inflate tender procurement processes and so on, we must deal with that as well within the framework of the public service.
Now, Advocate Mkawane, how does your work interlink with SARS?
Our work is to ensure that SARS is providing the service that taxpayers deserve. SARS has got a client charter. So our role is to ensure that SARS follows that charter in terms of providing the service that they need to provide to taxpayers. Now, so our office is also meant to try to bring about a balance between the powers that SARS has, and the duties on the one hand, and the obligations and the rights of the taxpayers. So we come in there I mean,
So you're the police?
We are the police of SARS. So we make sure, or we ensure that Adrian and the organization, they're providing the kind of service that they need to provide. So if anyone has a complaint, for example, of a service nature or a procedural nature or administrative nature, they can approach our office. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes you have taxpayers who probably have not been served well over a period, and they go to SARS and they don't get assistance. And our role is to step in and say, wait a minute, SARS, you have not played the game well here.
And what do you do in the event that indeed they have not played the game well?
The Act says it gives us permission. In fact, we can make a recommendation. So say we receive a complaint from a taxpayer. We investigate that we have access to the SARS systems. So we can investigate, we can look at what is it that SARS has done on the system.
Are you winning that battle? Because, look, Adrian represents an institution which is regarded as a monster by a lot of people. You say SARS, people run away, okay? Yes. And I don't know whether rightly so or wrongly so, but it is a fact, you know? How are you dealing with SARS? Because I would imagine SARS is untouchable.
You would think that SARS is untouchable. The Act, acting in terms of the Act, we have more power in the sense that when we make recommendations to SARS and we say, SARS, you have not handled this taxpayer properly. Mm. This is our recommendation. Maybe you need to apologize, or maybe you need to rectify that.
Need to apologize, not give money back.
No, I'm just giving an example. It does happen. It does happen where SARS may have to apologize, where they have not treated the taxpayer properly. So that recommendation
are not obligations.
They are not obligations.
Yeah.
I was speaking today, the tax indaba, and you know, the criticism has always been the tax ombud does not have teeth. So I even joked about it and said, look, you know, that we don't have teeth, so we went out to the dentist to get, you know, false teeth so that, you know, we can bite. But how we bite, it's what we recommend to SARS. If they overlook that or they disregard that, it may end up in the annual report. So we report to the minister.
All right.
We have to provide an annual report to the minister.
Hold that thought there. Mr. Leke, when we return, I just want us to talk about the corruption in as far as tax collection is concerned, and perhaps some of these high-profile cases that you've been handling. There's a gentleman who had to part with almost R1 billion because you settled with him. We'll talk about that. Question time takes a break. Please don't go away.
Welcome to our Friday edition of A View from the House, coming to you live from Parliament. My name is Asanda Mbeche. President Jacob Zuma officially opens the National House of Traditional Leaders and calls on traditional leaders to work closely with elected public representatives.
South Africa is a much better place to live in than it was before 1994. Many of our traditional leaders can attest to that fact, having seen improvements.
A View from the House, weekdays at 2:30 on SABC News.
Just the way we like it. Catch all 64 games of the FIFA World Cup live from 12 June to 13 July on SABC TV and our 19 radio stations. SABC, the official broadcaster of the 2014 FIFA World Cup Brazil.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. My guest today is Mr. Adrian Leke. He's the national spokesperson of SARS, and Advocate Eric Mkawani is the chief executive officer of the press, or not press, see, I'm a journalist. I always think press ombudsman.
The
Tax ombud. Now, Mr. Leke, just tell us, perhaps, in as much as it may sound trivial, but it is true that people don't like you. Not you personally. They don't like SARS.
Well, I'm hoping to be the friendly face of SARS. I think the reality is, in law and in the general framework of the public service, we're a public institution.
Yeah.
So we have to account for our actions, and we have to be transparent in what we do. And added to the rights that taxpayers have in this country is Eric and the office that was established last year. I think we're still in the preliminary phase of our interactions.
Okay.
But we wanted to ensure that in law there's a mechanism free of charge to taxpayers when they are really aggrieved and we don't live up to our end of the bargain,
Okay.
where we don't treat people properly and the taxpayer feels, but I've gone through your call center, I've gone to your branch office, but I don't get service, I don't get the resolution of my issue. Okay. That's where the tax ombud is there, and they must also act and make recommendations whether we abuse our statutory powers, because our powers are extensive, and I think an oversight role like this is very essential in a democratic context like ours.
Tax scams and fraud, there's quite a lot of those. Are you losing that battle?
It's difficult to say. I think we detect much more than we were able to previously. Automation obviously plays a big role in us being able to detect risk much better. But if you look at, for example, one part of the tax system, which is VAT, value-added tax. So there, for the last financial year, we collected more than 300 billion in VAT, and we paid out probably more than 100 billion in VAT refunds to taxpayers. So there's about 500,000 companies in this country who are participants in our economy. They trade, they do business, they make money, they charge VAT to people, they are registered for VAT, and a portion of that they must pay over to SARS. But from time to time they can make claims where they purchase goods and services and they are charged VAT, they can claim that back from us. So if you look at the scope of 150 billion plus, which we pay back in VAT refunds, obviously there's always the element of risk that there can be abuse because of the magnitude of the amount and the number of transactions we engage with taxpayers every year. Okay. So we are building systems to ensure that we can protect the fiscus. I think we've made good progress to make sure that the refund that goes to party X is in fact intended for that party and is not fraudulent. Okay. But the VAT part is the biggest risk factor that we can identify.
What is the tax ombud's impressions with SARS?
Look, I think we all agree SARS is running very well, or is run very well. Internationally, everybody says, look, you have a very good revenue authority. Okay. So, yes, those are the impressions. I mean, you can market SARS. You can go to Australia. Today I was speaking with the former revenue authority, the former commissioner of the Australian tax office. Yes. And he remarked, look, I mean, he has had interactions with the former Minister of Finance who was at some stage a commissioner. He says, look, we can see SARS is running well. But even with that, there is still room to balance those powers and to make sure that SARS can even be a better organization and provide the service and because our recommendations and our communications
Yes.
and to the minister it definitely will ensure that SARS is becoming even better.
Now, do you think that people are aware of both yourselves and what SARS is supposed to do?
There's still a bit of education to be done.
Okay.
The office was just launched recently.
Yes, of course.
So we're doing the groundwork, with the communications.
Yes.
We had an official launch only on the 7th of April. So it's a reasonably new office. We have established a website.
Maybe you must take him.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, maybe we should take Adrian, but we have someone else here that is probably. So all those basics, we are trying to put them in place.
Okay.
And I think with time we'll be able to address it.
Do you think you're doing well?
I think that's relative. It depends on people's experience. We would be happy if the majority of those people on screen now come to our offices regularly,
Yes.
if they have a satisfactory experience with us. That's the one side, which is the service side. And then we are set annual targets by the Minister of Finance and his budget.
Okay.
So for the last financial year, we had to collect 809 billion rands. We exceeded that by about 700 million. So 899.7 billion is what we ultimately collected. And that's another measure by which we evaluate ourselves. For the current financial year, we'll have to collect about 10% more than 990 billion. In an economic context where there isn't strong growth, where there are specific risks to GDP growth, at least for the next few quarters. And we have to operate in that context, as we had to take into account, for example, the 2008 global recession, where within a very short period of time, in a particular financial year, some 60 billion rands is wiped off your books that you didn't account for or didn't take into account when you made your projections. So the economic variables pose specific challenges to us, and we have to constantly be mindful and monitor what's happening to the economy.
Are defaults due to lack of knowledge or deliberate fraud?
We would hate to think that it is ignorance on the part of the taxpayer.
Okay.
Because before we get to a default position, we really try and issue some form of communication, make contact with the taxpayer to say, look, in terms of our records, this is what you've declared, this is what we found.
Yes.
Can you come in and discuss it? So that we prevent an escalation of the thing where there's no responsiveness and the imposition of penalties and so on, which may ultimately end up with the Office of the Tax Ombudsman. I think we want to avoid that. And really, any taxpayer with a default situation, our advice has always been come and talk, come and engage, rather than wait for punitive actions to keep.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll wrap up the show. This is Question Time. Please don't go away.
Across the globe, the continent and the entire country, every second there's always a breaking story. SABC News is your reliable eye, ear and information system in bringing you events as they happen. Our cutting-edge and hard-hitting journalism leaves no stone unturned, giving you the whole picture every time. Join us every day on SABC3 and know what is happening around you. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
The shortage of nurses places those nurses who are working under such pressure.
To have one registered nurse looking after a ward full of patients, of over 40 patients, is unreasonable.
But Africa has made tremendous progress. In the year 2012, there were only 50,000 children too many, but only 50,000 children that died of measles in the whole of Africa, compared to 330,000 in the year 2000.
For all your health issues, join Dr. Sello every Saturday, 9 to 10 a.m. CAT.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. My guest today, Mr. Adrian Leke, is the spokesperson of the South African Revenue Services, and Advocate Eric Mkawani is the Chief Executive Officer at the Office of the Tax Ombud. Now, before I come to you, Advocate, Adrian, how does it come that somebody like Mr. King can owe SARS R1 billion plus, and he settles for 900 million plus? And, you know, by settlement, it means SARS said, okay, fine, you know what, we're willing to accept this. This is not exactly what you owe us, which means this gentleman owed more than R1 billion in tax.
That is correct, yes. Just before I go into the merits of that case, in terms of our laws, confidentiality is a very important element.
Okay.
In this instance, matters have progressed to going to court, tax courts and public courts.
Yeah.
So it then becomes a matter in the public domain which we can then discuss.
Sure.
Our litigation with the taxpayer that you referred to, the duration was more than 10 years, so more than a decade.
Okay.
So that's one of the factors we take into account when a settlement offer is made. Also, so there was civil litigation, the physical taxes owed to SARS, which we were getting court orders for and executing those orders through a curator that the High Court appoints. But there was also criminal side. There were 322 charges of a criminal nature, including fraud and so on. And that was being prosecuted by the NPA. So the settlement had to take into account, can the NPA and the Court of Law agree to a settlement and the figure? We had to consider that we've been litigating for 10 years. If we continue to fight this battle before court, what will the ultimate cost be to the fiscus? So those things are factored in.
Okay.
When we finally make a settlement, it goes before committee of legal persons within SARS, where the merits are then evaluated. And ultimately, we want to see what's in the best interest of the fiscus, what's in the best interest of the taxpayer.
Okay.
Because here you have someone who's been fighting the state for 10 years,
yes.
willing to make a public stand to say, I should have engaged the Revenue Authority far earlier. I want to continue with my life and do business. I have interest in a listed company on the stock exchange. I don't want to fight the state forever.
Okay.
So we take that into account. By the time we settled in August 2013, we had already disposed of a wine farm, of a Falcon 900 jet, and other assets and shares that we were able to attach through the legal process. So all of those things are then taken into account before we come to a settlement decision.
Now, would the tax ombud be willing to intervene in such a matter? You are a lawyer.
We have a mandate. Our mandate specifies exactly what we can do, and we also have limitations. Now, cases that are before court fall within that limitation.
Yes.
So we cannot touch on
So
that
had he
case.
come to you before he went to court, would you have taken the matter up?
If the dispute involved legislation or challenges in legislation, it will fall outside our mandate.
Yeah.
But if a dispute was of a service nature, it would be a different story. But judging by what I know about the matter, definitely it would have been outside our mandate.
Would you have taken up Julius Malima's case?
Well, look, if he brings a case that will be service-related, falling within our mandate, definitely would entertain any taxpayer.
He said, well, and this was before he made the good public relations statement, but he was accusing SARS of fighting political battles. You don't think you're going to find yourself being accused of such?
Look, there's always been a tension between taxpayers and SARS. Now, I ask some delegates today, who of you is happy, to pay tax? And I tried to raise my hand, and nobody raised their hand. I mean, there's a whole hall full of 500 or about 300 and something people.
Quietly, they would all have said yes.
So there's always that tension.
Okay.
So you'll expect this tension to, internationally, no matter where you go, nobody wants to pay tax.
The question that we asked when we started the show, one of the four, don't you think you sometimes are used to fight political battles?
Well, Mpo, we try to value our independence, really. We must preserve, as explained earlier, the integrity of our institution, because once you start to be the subject of any political or any other forces outside of your mandate, that's really where the institution is weakened. We can't let that happen. So we act procedurally in terms of what powers the law affords us. We record everything. So any taxpayer with a tax debt, if they want to call Adrian and say, Chief, can we meet? Yes, we can meet, but I will bring a colleague with. We will record what is discussed. If you want to talk about settling your default position, that must be done in writing. And it's those small steps that help us to follow a paper trail, to build up evidence so that one day down the line, if the matter is not settled, there's a disgruntled party, fingers are pointed, you have on record, this is how we follow the process.
Okay.
And we would want to follow due process in the matter of any taxpayer.
Okay.
And particularly when a matter goes to court. By that stage, in the overwhelming majority of cases, we have a docket of evidence to say this is how we handled it. Mr. or Mrs. Judge, you decide whether we acted unfairly, procedurally or not.
So you would bring Jean Ravera to the meeting?
Any number of colleagues.
Okay. Now, perhaps a very quick one. Who gets taxed how much?
Okay, let's start with individuals. There are about 15.4 million working people in this country, from whose salaries pay as you earn would be deducted. So if you earn above 67,000 for the year, you start to pay income tax.
Okay. And Mr. or rather Advocate Mkawane, what would be your final words here?
The one thing we can say, the office is there. Our office is there to assist the taxpayers who may have unresolved complaints against SARS. And we can be reached. We have a website. We have a phone number and all those things.
Hoping that people will indeed come to you to report him.
Hopefully not.
Thank you. That was Question Time for today. A big thank you to my guests and to you for watching the show. Our email address, questiontime@sabc.co.za. Twitter handle @questiontime24. Have yourself a wonderful time. Goodbye.